Perspective. Dr. Kaiser Nyatsumba, a chartered director, a turnaround strategy expert, business rescue practitioner, the author of just under 20 books, and a former newspaper editor. Welcome to Perspective, Dr. Kaiser Nyatsumba's podcast that focuses on business, politics, corporate governance, social issues, English grammar, and anything else that takes his fancy. The first talk show host on SABC1, where he presented Dilemma in Perspective, Dr. Nyatsumba now presents his hard-hitting, no-holds-barred podcast, Dr. Kaiser's Perspective. Hello again. Welcome. Today, we place the spotlight on traditional leaders and our democracy. Do traditional leaders, such as chiefs, kings, and queens, have a role to play in a democracy? And what is that role? In recent times, we've had some bizarre actions and pronouncements by some of the country's most prominent traditional leaders. Now, I must explain that although I use the en vogue phrase, traditional leaders, which is favored by our political elite, in reality, these are tribal leaders, because they supposedly lead those who belong to their respective tribes. Let us start with Abatembu King, Bielekaya Dalindyebo Sabata, a man who has been mired in various controversies over the years. In recent times, he was a guest of the Israeli government in Tel Aviv, as though he had any authority to bind the region over which he is a monarch, or those who are allegedly under his authority. You will notice that I've avoided using the word subjects, because in terms of our constitution, we are all citizens with the same rights. In a democracy, those born of royalty have exactly the same rights as their alleged subjects do. Subsequent to that visit, Dalindyebo hosted Israeli leaders in the Eastern Cape and took them around to some public hospitals. That was followed by the expulsion of Israeli ambassador to South Africa, Ariel Seidman, from the country, which was immediately met with the expulsion of South African ambassador to the illegally Israeli-occupied or controlled Palestine, Sean Benefeld. Also recently, Zulu King Misizulu Gazwelithini called for the renaming of the province where he lives to KwaZulu, with the Natal part of the name being removed. The reason given for this strange demand is that the province belongs to or is home to people of Zulu descent. Apparently forgotten, or conveniently so, is the fact that the current name KwaZulu-Natal was an important political compromise during the pre-democracy talks. These are but examples of recent controversies stirred by people who occupied their positions by virtue of the accident of birth. Thanks to support from some prominent political parties like the ANC and the IFP, these individuals are also unhappy with the level of monthly stipends that they receive from the taxpayer. Note, I say not from the government, but from the taxpayer, because it is money from your and my pockets as taxpayers. At its meeting in Boksburg in August 2025, the National House of Traditional and Khoisan Leaders resolved to call for an amendment of the country's constitution to guarantee the power, functions, and protection of traditional leaders. House Deputy Leader Inkosi Langamavuso was quoted on SABC TV demanding that Chapter 12 of the Constitution would have to be amended because, and I quote, it does not guarantee the recognition and powers of traditional leaders, unquote. Now, at the insistence of the IFP, this two-page Chapter 12 of the Constitution merely recognizes the status and role of traditional leaders, subject to the Constitution it states. Yet the people who were born into these positions now dare to demand more powers for themselves without standing for elections and without accountability to anybody. They seem to fail to appreciate that nowhere in a democracy do traditional leaders have any powers by virtue of being members of royal families. They seem to forget conveniently that South Africa is a diverse and polyglot republic and not a kingdom. In those democracies which still have monarchies, traditional leaders have no more than ceremonial powers or ceremonial roles to play without any special powers that exist in law at all. My view on the traditional leaders' demand is simple. There should be absolutely no compromise made to grant tribal leaders any powers. The law as it stands states that even people living in areas which fall under the jurisdiction of those traditional leaders have the right to exempt themselves from or to opt out of any rule imposed by a so-called traditional leader. For some years now, the ANC has tried to pass the government's Traditional Courts Bill of 2017, which would grant traditional leaders the right to adjudicate some disputes and to hear matters involving certain categories of crime. That proposed legislation has been in the making for so long, precisely because if passed and assented to by the president, it would not pass constitutional muster. For traditional leaders to adjudicate over any matter, those who are party to that dispute would have to choose to subject themselves to the authority. The moment that anyone chooses to opt out of that process, that would be the end of that process. Those traditional leaders who hanker after the ugly past should be reminded that the country's constitution states through the Bill of Rights that, and I quote, everyone is equal before the law and has a right to equal protection and benefit of the law, unquote. In fact, there's absolutely no reference to traditional leaders in the Bill of Rights. So while King Misuzulu is entitled, like all other citizens, to hold and express an opinion, including a wish, he has absolutely no right whatsoever to change the name of the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Only the people, through either a referendum or their elected leaders, have the authority to do so. Thank you. Thank you for watching Dr. Kaiser Netsumba's Perspective podcast. Please subscribe to it and share the content. To contact Dr. Kaiser Netsumba with a business proposal, a comment, or a suggested topic, write to the email address kaiser@kaisernetsumba.com. Again, that was kaiser@kaisernetsumba.com.